Alright, welcome back. In this video, I want to talk about the grid system, but tie it together with what we've already learned about the Flexbox utilities, so that we can get more precise control over how things are aligned and how they're spread out across a row. So remember that when we use the grid, which we can quickly make a row in here, I have a new document again, with a container. It says grid and Flexbox. I'm going to make a row, and let's say that I just make a single item in here, column small 6. Like that. And inside of it, I'm going to do some lorem ipsum. Let's say lorem 20. And this is in VS Code. I believe Sublime has a similar shortcut. If it doesn't, just type random characters. This is not going to be important. Now what I want to show, if I give this a background, let's do bg info. Well, first, I just want to go back and show you again that it is indeed Flexbox enabled by default. If we look at the row, display is set to flex. So we have access to all of those Flexbox utilities to do things like spread out the content. So if we now go to our entire row and give it a border, you look at the available space versus where our row is, we have a couple of options. Do we want this to be at the beginning? Do we want it on the left side? What if we wanted it to go on the right side? Well, do we have to add like an empty column here that takes up 6? We could do that. We could easily do that. I would just basically duplicate this entire thing and then delete all the text and get rid of the background. So now we have, if I refresh, a column 6 and a column 6, but that's kind of wasteful just to have an empty column 6 if we're not using it. So instead, I could just make a single column 6 inside of the whole row, but then move it around. So if I wanted it to go to the right, I could go to my row and say, justify content. Maybe some of this is sticking, maybe. Justify content end. Back from our Flexbox days, a couple videos ago. This is the start, this is the end. I could also say, maybe justify content center, and that will put it in the middle. So I could achieve this same effect by making an empty column here that takes up 3. This column takes up 6, and then another empty one that takes up 3 again, to add up to 12. Or I can just say justify content center. But here's another example. Let's say that I have a couple of these. Let's just do 2, but instead of 6, they are 3 and 3. So here are my 2 items. What if I wanted them centered? All right, that's easy enough. Go to our row, justify content center. All right, not that exciting. But I can also do justify content between. And this one I end up using often. If you want to take an available space and you have different items in there and you want them to basically take up that space and add the correct amount of even space between them. That's a bad explanation, but you can see what I mean. Let's say we have even one more here. So that gives us 9 total units, but I don't want them touching each other, if that makes sense. I want space between them. So I could do this. And because I have columns small, they are going to shrink down once we hit extra small. But this gives us the ability to change how our items are spaced out without having to manually go in and say, okay, column 3. And then we have, what would this be? So column 3 again, column 3, that gives us 9. That means we have 3 extra units. So this is 1.5 units and 1.5. We can't really do that with the way our markup works for Bootstrap. It's not cleanly divisible. So this is actually something that is way easier to do using Flexbox. We just say distribute that space evenly. Even if it's an odd number of spaces, just split it up. Or we could come in and do justify content around. Same thing, but it takes the space and adds it half to the left, half to the right, half to the left, half to the right, and so on. So another thing we can do, aside from justifying the content to move things around horizontally, because when we're talking about a row, the flex direction by default is left to right. But what I can do is instead, let's make one of these, this one is going to be lorem 50. I kind of just messed up all my indentation. But if I refresh, now you'll see they all grow to take up that space, even though this one and this one are much shorter. So if I didn't want that to happen, like let's give these two a different background color. Let's make this one warning and this one warning as well, just to highlight what I'm talking about. This is a lot longer, but these are stretching. And if you remember back from the Flexbox utilities video, that's happening because the default align items value is stretch. So the other two items stretch out to be the same size as the longest or the tallest item on the cross axis. I can change that though. If I want, I could say align items start. And now they are aligned to the top. This is the start of the cross axis. This is the main axis and the cross axis, top to bottom. Or maybe I want them aligned at the bottom. So that would be align items end. Or if I want them centered, which often you'll see, I could do align items center. Just like that. So you can see I have a lot of flexibility now. Flexibility now to move things within the grid. So I'm saying how much space they should take up in the row, but then also if I don't use all of that space, I can move them around horizontally. So I could move them all, like we've already seen, let's say to the center or to the start, which is the default. But then I also can work vertically depending on the heights of items. I can move things and control them so that they aren't just stretching to take up all of that space. They're not equally heighted. That's not really English. They're not all the same size. And that's really powerful. So we have a lot of control now. I distribute the space horizontally, how many units things should take up, but also I can do it vertically. And if I have excess space, I can divvy it up however I'd like. Next, I'm going to show one last use for a flex property called align self. So we've seen align items, which will make everything centered vertically, or everything everything aligned to the bottom or the top. But what if we don't want every single item to be that way? So let me show you an example. I'm actually going to get rid of these column 3s, and I'm going to make a column, let's do column 2, and I'll give it a BG of primary, sure. And inside of that, I'll do lorem 10, and then I'll duplicate this a couple of times like that. So that gives us 2, 4, 6, 8. And then I'm going to make one more that is going to be a column 2, and it's going to have BG success. This really doesn't matter. And this one is going to be longer, lorem 30. I just did 301 accidentally. Lorem 30. Okay. So if I refresh, I'm going to get rid of how we are justifying content and aligning the items. So this is what we have here. So let's say that I do want everything centered. So that's easy, as we've already talked about. Justify content center. But then vertically, I don't want them all stretching like this. Let's say I want everything aligned to the bottom. So that's going to be align items end. But then, let's say, actually, I want this one to be aligned to the top, this one to be aligned to the top as well, or, I don't know, let's maybe do like a checkerboard pattern. This will be bottom, this is top, bottom, and top. So to do that, I can go into each column. So like this second one right here, lorem ipsum, or fine, I'm changing my mind too much. Let's do this first one. Let's say I want this one, I can do align self, start. And now it goes to the top. So it's a way of basically overriding and saying, actually, this one, you want all of them to be aligned to the end. Well, this one says align it to the start or to the center if you want to center it. So we have control over that now. So let's do align self start on that one. Let's do this one as, let's see how that looks. Fine. And then we'll do one more. This one will be aligned to the start as well. Align self start. So the point here is really to show you that you can move your items around individually, vertically. You use the grid system to control how wide they are. And then you also can, if you have excess space, you can spread it out using justify content. So very powerful stuff. When you think of all the different ways you could organize and display your content, there's a lot to think about. And also, this doesn't really take into account the fact that this stuff can be responsive too. We might have more space as a web page grows. So I'm going to wrap up with just one more example of that. So let's make another row. So I want something that starts relatively large at a small size. So let's say like column medium 6, sure. And make 2 of those. And inside of them, we'll just do lorem 20. And I should actually just duplicate this one. So I just have some content in there. I refresh my page. I'm also going to make everything text centered. Why not? And I'll give this one we'll give them both a BG of light. See if that shows up. Oof, it's kind of tough to see that gray. So instead of light, let's do danger. All right, so my two pieces of content, they're going to stack down here. Then once I get to medium, they're going to go to 6 and 6. But let's say I don't want them to keep stretching like this. Let's say once we get to extra large or to large, I say at column large, I want them to be 5. Column large, 5. Like that. Well, the problem is now that it looks fine on medium. They're 50-50. But then once we get here to large, they're now going to the left, and the extra space is over here. So I could say justify content around or between. Let's do around. And this will keep them centered. So here, actually, let's do between. I changed my mind. There we go. So we go from being stacked, it's kind of hard because it's at the very bottom, to now they are 5 out of 12 each with some space between them. And we could keep changing that. But what I'm trying to show is that using these utilities, if we have things that are changing size, so it's going from 6 units to 5 units as we grow, we now have extra space that wasn't there before. Now we can control what happens with that space instead of it just going to the right side. Anyway, there's a lot of cool stuff we can do here. It's very powerful when you think about all the different layouts you could possibly have, and then you think about making things responsive. There's a lot. But I'll leave it off here. So those are the Flex utilities: justify content, align items, and align self.